I will call to order this regular meeting of the Mount Pleasant City Commission this Monday, June 8th, and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, has the roll been taken?
Yes, all are present tonight.
Okay. We do not have any proclamations or presentations tonight. So do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Seeing no hands, we'll open up the first public input on agenda items. This is the time for the public to comment on anything that's on our agenda tonight. I see that we have at least one member of the public. If Andy would like to speak. I see Andy Tyson is on with us tonight. If you'd like to speak, I don't know how familiar Andy is with Zoom.
He's familiar, Mayor. He's participated in another one of our meetings.
I guess if Andy, if you wanted to speak, I would just want to give me a thumbs up or.
Yeah, no comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay. And then, Manager Ridley, did we have any emailed comments to the commission?
Not that are related to the agenda items.
Okay. Next, I will close the public input for now, and then next is the receipt of petitions and communications, and I'll hand it over to Manager Ridley.
Tonight on this agenda, Commissioners, you have the report on the pending items, and attached to that is our monthly report on citizen complaints received. So if you wouldn't mind, I would like to digress for a moment because it seems like an appropriate time to mention a few things related to what is happening across our nation right now. And the two items that I would like to mention is, first of all, the commission will recall that about 1.5 to 2 years ago, we made a commitment to implement a number of items in the city regarding having our Director of Public Safety, Paul Loria, working with the Mount Pleasant Area Diversity Group and the Human Rights Committee on a number of initiatives. And in December of last year, we reported on those and the solid foundation of progress that had been made thus far, and reiterated our commitment to continuing to build upon that. And I think it's important to remember that in these times that we are in, because these recent events across our nation reemphasize the impact in our community, even if the event happened somewhere else. And secondly, based on some of the recent pronouncements by the governor and some bills that have been introduced into the legislature, I wanted to make a couple of comments regarding those. And we certainly support any initiatives that help out during these difficult topics throughout our nation. But I would mention that in the city, we currently train on various de-escalation tactics. And as a matter of fact, some of the best trainers in the state happen to be within our own police staff. We also regularly train on the appropriate use of force. And our policy does include a duty to intervene in certain circumstances. And we also train with community mental health. And please note that I'm not saying this because I think we have nothing to change in these matters. That's certainly not the case. I merely share the information to indicate that I believe in our community, we're a little bit in front of the curve, as we're committed to many of the initiatives currently being discussed at the state level. And we will look for improvements in those areas as we continue to move forward. These are certainly difficult times in our nation, and we're not immune in the city of Mount Pleasant. But our police leadership, and I believe our police officers, excuse me, are committed to continuing to foster those positive relationships within our community and have an unwavering commitment to continually improving what we do. And I think Director Loria said it best to me this morning when he said there is no finish line. There's a constant commitment to be better in this area. But I also think on a larger scale, it's important to us to remember as a larger community, we all probably need to take some time to do some personal reflection about ourselves. And during some of the fair and impartial training, policing training that we had last November with the community, one of the things that the 30 of us learned that attended that training is that all of us have some amount of implicit bias. And the important thing is that we recognize what bias we might have and find ways to mitigate the impact it may have on our actions. And that, I think that applies to our law enforcement, but I think it also applies to all of us as community members. So I apologize for that digression, but I thought it was important and it seemed related to our complaint summary that you receive on a monthly basis. The other items on the receipt of petitions and communications are 3 sets of minutes from February. One is from the Tax Increment Finance Authority. The second is from the Parks and Recreation Commission. And the third is from the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority Economic Development Corporation. And then the other item on the agenda was a receipt of a notice of a temporary closure of Broadway Street between Maine and University. And as you know, we've mentioned this concept about potentially closing some of our downtown streets in order to allow more public space for businesses due to the limits they have on capacity and social distancing under the current executive orders. So based on the feedback received from various stakeholders in the survey that was done, we've approved a temporary closure right now of only Broadway Street between Maine and University. And this will allow businesses to have expanded outdoor space for serving customers, similar to what many other cities across the state have done. It will be limited to temporary structures in the street area, some of which will have to be moved during the nighttime hours. And we will evaluate the effectiveness of it, and we commit to evaluate additional requests for other streets that might come in for the downtown area. And we put this item in this section of the agenda to be consistent with how we handle temporary traffic control orders, so that all of the elected officials and the public are aware of the temporary closure and know that we are accepting feedback on it as we continue to work through that process. And then as far as additional petitions and communications, 2 communications came in over the weekend, both of which are related to this temporary closure. And generally we would just give you copies of those at the dais so that you had them. But in this new format, if you don't mind, I'll quickly read these 2 communications to make sure that all of the commissioners are aware of them. The first one was from Charlotte Grant, who indicates she's a Mount Pleasant resident, although I don't have her address. But her communication says, "Hi, I am emailing to voice my support for the idea of closing part of Broadway this summer to allow local businesses and restaurants to utilize the space to serve customers outdoors. As these businesses are able to reopen, I look forward to supporting them financially. I think giving them this extra space will allow them to remain economically viable throughout this difficult time. I have also emailed the city commissioners on this subject, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my opinion." And again, that was from Charlotte Grant from Mount Pleasant. The second one is from Jamie Maynard, who again is a Mount Pleasant resident, and her communication says, "Good evening. As someone who lives here in our beautiful city of Mount Pleasant, I wanted to express my feelings for the possibility of closing Broadway to allow more space for outdoor dining this summer due to the recent issues with COVID. I am an independent hairstylist at Poppy and Pearl Boutique Salon right on Broadway. We do have a few guests that unfortunately wouldn't be able to park far away and walk to our establishment. They usually get dropped off by their significant other or their guardian. I personally do not mind parking further away and walking to work for the day, but I do get concerned for the guests that are unable to make that further walk in, especially with salons just getting up and running again. Restaurants have the option to run at 50% capacity with carryout options. Possibly an idea would be to choose after a certain time in the day to close the street, like after 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, and maybe fully closed on Saturdays and Sundays when restaurants make the biggest percentage of their revenue in the week. Another thing to think of is possibly how we can bring more parking options to the downtown area. Having worked downtown now for a few years, there's been times where every single 10-hour lot is full. And if there was a parking garage or something of that nature, we could really benefit from that. Downtown Mount Pleasant is so beautiful, and we want more businesses to be brought our way downtown. We're all just fighting to stay afloat right now, especially salons, as we will be rebuilding what we lost these past 11 weeks through the summer and into the fall and winter months. I appreciate your time and am excited what you come up with as an option for our community. Best regards. And again, that was Jamie Raymond. And so those are the petitions and communications section of your agenda.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm gonna recognize, I see Commissioner Tolis has had his hand up.
I would just like to make a comment on and commend Chief Loria and the rest of the local police enforcement on the protest control. And on Sunday, Monday, I believe there's 3 of them. And I didn't even know that we were going to have these in town. I didn't know if they required a permit or what was going on, but I think everything was on a real short notice. Thank you.
Commissioner Gillis?
Yes, I have some concerns about the closure of Broadway Street. I have some concerns about the elimination of the scarce parking spaces in the downtown area. I also have concerns of those parking spaces after they're eliminated until September. Those businesses' patrons will then have to park on the side streets in front of other businesses, maybe taking up their parking spaces available in front of their businesses, and causing people to walk farther, not only for people that want to frequent the ones on Broadway Street, but then when you're displacing all those customers to the side streets, they're now taking up parking spaces in front of other businesses and displacing those customers. So I have concerns about rerouting the traffic. Myself, I live on the west side. I quite frequently take Broadway to get to Mission. And if myself and others are now rerouting traffic, instead of going through Broadway, they're coming up to Washington Street, and they could be going down Michigan Street. Michigan Street has Sacred Heart School on it. This temporary traffic control order goes through September 30th. That will hopefully be when school's in session. We're hoping to get back into the schools, but I have real concerns of traffic being rerouted through downtown onto Michigan Street in front of a school, which we already had to put up a safety light flasher in front of Sacred Heart because of the parents' concerns about their children crossing Michigan Street. I also have concerns about rerouting the traffic to Mosier. Mosier, if you are taking Mosier to Mission Street, there is no traffic light on Mosier as it comes up to Mission Street. So we're going to be increasing traffic getting onto Mission right there at that corner without a traffic light. So I don't feel comfortable with making this traffic order. And I also don't want to encourage community gatherings in the center of that street. We are not through COVID. Yes, the stay-at-home order has been lifted. Restaurants are able to participate at 50% occupancy. I don't see any restaurants being overloaded with patrons and customers that they're even going to, they may not even hit that 50% occupancy. So I don't want to encourage community gathering, because that's exactly what we're not supposed to encourage, is people getting close to each other and using that space in the streets to set up more, I'm assuming, dining areas. I can't, from the businesses that are on that stretch, there is not a lot of customers that are going to be not allowed into the store because of the occupancy, because of the square footage. So many people can go into a store. They still have to maintain the 6-foot distancing. Such places like Artreach, there's never going to be more people in Artreach that can be held in there. When I frequented Artreach, there might be 2-3 customers at the most. The downtown drugs isn't overly crowded. The convenience store on the corner of Maine and Broadway, I've never seen a lot of patrons in that store either. Also, ICCU and some other investment firms, they're not going to be utilizing our street. It's going to be either restaurants or retail, and I don't really see the need for that right now. We are just getting back into the throw of trying to start businesses up. And I think the factor of trying to reroute traffic onto Michigan Street and also on Mosier does not outweigh, the safety and the movement of traffic is more of a concern to me than what it would be to allow retail or restaurants to have more places for tables. So I am not comfortable with that traffic order. I don't know if any of my fellow commissioners also have concerns with that closure from what would start tomorrow for 4 months, September 30th. So I would like to hear if other fellow commissioners also have concerns.
Commissioner Ronan?
Wanted to echo what Petros said about public safety and the great job they did for the people participating in the march on Monday. I served as an observer in one of the marches and was incredibly impressed with the sensitivity and the leadership, and it was just good to see. So I'm just commenting on that more than.
Pete, I see your hand up. Do you have something to add?
If you would, I got a couple quick questions here regarding the closure of Broadway between Maine and University. I'm looking at the memo dated June 1st, 2020, page 2 of that, where the surveys were sent out, and it said 63% people responded that took the survey. 41 responded were in favor, and 22 were responded that were against it. Manager Ridley, do you have a breakdown of how many businesses were located in this block area downtown?
In that block area, we have 6 eateries, 4 retail businesses, and I'm not sure, Commissioner Tolis, how many would be in the other category. But I should clarify, I don't know of the respondents, how many of the respondents were from that one block area.
Okay. One other point, I talked to a few of the business owners down there. Most of them were associated with eateries, and they saw really no benefit in this. They really weren't for it. They have existing decks right now, which gives them extra space, and they felt shutting that down and not allowing people access would be a hindrance to their businesses. And I just wanted to pass this on to the rest of the commissioners. Thank you.
Well, I would say to the commission that this is a temporary traffic control order, and we'll be reevaluating it throughout the summer, and it's not a topic that we're going to be voting on or discussing really to great length anymore tonight, but to keep your ears open to the public and to those business owners, and we'll reevaluate this as we move on. So,
And Mayor, if I would like to reiterate that if we do permit anybody to utilize the street as those requests come in, we will be indicating to them that we are reserving the right to modify or adjust that time period or the use of the street based on the feedback that we receive. So if there's very little interest and or if there's a lot of negative feedback received or things we need to adjust over the time period, even though it's indicated to be in place until September, we will have the ability to make adjustments to it throughout that time period based on what we're hearing and what we're seeing. So I've certainly made note of some of the concerns, and we will keep our eyes peeled for that, and we'll try to adjust if necessary based on what we observe if it actually happens as people begin to use that street.
thank you, Manager Ridley. Next on our agenda is the consent calendar. Are there any items that need to be removed from the consent calendar this evening? None. I will have Manager Ridley go through our consent calendar items.
Yes, we have 4 items tonight for you on the consent calendar. The first is to consider approval of the minutes of your regular meeting of May 26th. And then we have a resolution that you've become quite familiar with seeing. And this resolution has to do with the waiving of the late fees on housing inspection applications. And as we've mentioned previously, it was necessary during some parts of the executive order to suspend some of our housing inspections of rental units. And it began to create a backlog in our inspections. We have now reinitiated those inspections and have a plan to eliminate that backlog and get caught up. But because of that, since the May applications have been received, which those are typically received in the month of April because they have to apply 30 days ahead of time, we have internally made the decision to waive any late fees for both those May applications, the June and the July applications. So that action has already been taken, and we're asking you to confirm that action after the fact. The resolution as drafted by the city attorney then goes one step further and suggests that we also waive the late fees for August, because again, those applications are due generally the first part before July 1st. So that would be the ending of our waiving of those fees for those August applications. So we're recommending you approve that resolution as drafted. The third item on the consent calendar is that while doing some of our annual maintenance on the HVAC system in the Borden building, our contractor noticed that one of the compressors for the City Hall chiller had failed and needed to be replaced. And the cost for the purchase of that compressor and the installation of it is just over $15,900. And even though we have enough funds in the existing City Hall maintenance account to cover that, we're recommending a budget amendment at this time because we know we have future planned maintenance that will happen in the building throughout the rest of the year. So if we don't amend the budget, we know that we would be over budget at the end of the year. So we're recommending that you proactively approve that budget adjustment for $15,920. And then lastly, we have the approval of payrolls and warrants.
Commissioner Tolis,
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented, please.
Commissioner Gillis,
Second, and I'd like to ask Manager Ridley a question.
sure.
With the HVAC chiller, is that just servicing our portion of the Borden building, or are we splitting the cost with the other tenants that are in our building that J.E. Johnson rents to?
No, that just services our portion of the building.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Nancy, could you repeat? I think you kind of got cut off there. I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, that the chiller and the HVAC just services our section of the building.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands up, we'll move to a roll call vote to approve the consent calendar agenda.
Okay. Commissioner Toles,
Yes.
Commissioner Ronan,
You need to unmute.
Yes.
okay. Commissioner Lalone,
Yes.
Commissioner Gillis,
Yes.
Commissioner Alsager,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Perschbacher,
Yes.
Mayor Joseph.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. All right. Next on our agenda is another familiar item. It is the approval of the 2021-2026 capital improvement plan. As every commissioner has gotten the memo that was sort of drafted from our discussion at our last meeting. And Manager Ridley, did you have any comments for the commission before we start our discussion?
No, the only thing I would reiterate is, as you indicated, the memo includes the update based on your last work session discussion about which items should we move forward with for 2021 and which ones should be deferred to future years. So the resolution as drafted approves the plan as presented, but with the deferral of a number of 2021 projects to be reprioritized next year when the capital improvement plan is put together. And then also identifies 3 projects that may go forward in 2021 if we feel confident that the revenues are there to support those as the operating budget is brought to you for consideration. So we would recommend you approve the resolution as presented with its attachment.
Commissioner Ronan.
I move that we approve the resolution as presented.
Commissioner Alsager.
I will second that motion.
I just wanted to voice my support also for the resolution and the capital improvement plan. The resolution that is drafted and put together is a result of the commission's response to our economic realities due to probably a shortage in revenue sharing from the state due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the deficit that the cities or the state is going to see, and that's going to affect municipalities in Michigan and literally probably across the country. And so we basically set aside nearly $2 million in projects to make sure that we could cover any expenses and loss in revenue for this year and next year. And we'll probably see some of those effects in the following year, unfortunately. The one project that I did want to bring up is the Stewart Extension project. That project does cover, what it would do is help alleviate our sanitary wastewater lines. I do think it's in the proper category as that if we have enough money that we could potentially move on it when we get to the budget discussions later in the year. And it would require the property owners to give funds to complete those projects because they would connect their sub pump to the sewer lines and out of the sanitary wastewater lines. So that's a project that I think is really important to our community. We saw the floods in 2017 and our neighbors to the east, sort of the devastation, and also became really close to ourselves here. Where a wastewater plant it didn't happen, but if it overflowed, they would be dumping potentially raw waste into the Chippewa River. So it's an important project that's going to help our community in the future. But hopefully the timing will line up down the road. So seeing no other discussion, we can move to a roll call vote on the capital improvement plan.
Okay.
Commissioner Rona, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. All right, we will proceed to a vote then.
All right, Commissioner Alsager,
Yes.
Commissioner Gillis,
Yes.
Commissioner Lalone,
Yes.
Commissioner Ronan,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolis,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Perschbacher,
Yes.
Mayor Joseph.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Next on our agenda is item number 9, which is to consider the confirmation of the sale between the Economic Development Corporation and Hvac Construction for property in the Industrial Park South. I serve on the EDC board as the city commission representative, and this project is going to involve the 3.5 acre parcel that the EDC has owned for quite some time now, and this project is likely to be that parcel is likely to be developed in the very near future, and also aligns with the EDA covenant restrictions that we recently approved or consented to into that allow our stormwater basin over there to help with development, create jobs. So, Manager Ridley, did you have any comments before we get into discussion?
I would just add a couple additional things to what you said, Mayor. The recommended sale that the Economic Development Corporation is recommending to you would be to Hvac Construction or one of their related entities, but they intend to construct a building for one of their clients, and that client will open an industrial use that will create 4 to 6 jobs as soon as they open up. And the EDC saw this project as having a positive economic impact, especially, and was excited about it, especially in light of the economy that we may be finding ourselves in. And as you know, the EDC project plan requires the city commission to confirm the sale of any properties. So we're recommending that you pass the motion as presented to confirm the sale of the land according to the terms that were negotiated by the EDC and Hvac Construction.
Commissioner Tolis?
Yeah, is Mr. Tyson still online where I can ask him a question?
He is still on the line.
Yep, Mr. Tyson is with us.
Here he is.
Andy, a quick question. This building that you're building, is your company turnkeying this? And you
Yes.
own the property and then lease the building out?
That's the intent right now. We have a prospective tenant with a industrial use by right. At this time, I'd prefer to keep it anonymous until we see approval, but the idea is to develop a turnkey facility that they would then occupy. There would be some portion of that land still available for future development, as this would be the first building of hopefully several.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, I'm going to be supporting this because we've been sitting on this property for a long time, number one. Number two, they were sold in 10-acre chunks and listed at about $15,000. So I see the assessor had it assessed at 42, and Mr. Tyson's company is counted at 48, and we have 3.5 acres, so that's not too far off the 15,000 originally, which would have been 52.5. So I have no problem with this. We need to get it market and get it back on a tax roll. I will be supporting this.
Commissioner Tolis, can I take that as a motion to approve the sale as presented?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay. Commissioner Alsager?
Once again, I will second the motion.
Okay. And Commissioner Gillis?
Yes, just clarification. The assessor assessed that property at 52, and Kowinski Construction is giving us 48. So the assessment was 52. I don't know. Commissioner Tolis, did you just say 42, or did I didn't hear you correctly?
I believe I read that in there.
Ms. Ridley, it was 52, wasn't it?
Yeah, the assessor had it tentatively valued at $52,000. You're correct, Commissioner Gillis. But the agreed upon sale price is $48,000 because of the immediate construction and the number of jobs created.
I take that back. I made a mistake on that. It was 52,000. Best price, original offer was 42, and then it was bumped to 48. But I mean, how's the assessor going to assess it at 52 when it's sold in 10-acre chunks at 15,000 per acre? So you take the 3.5 acres, it's going to be right around 52.5 was the price many years ago. So I mean, they're just sitting there stagnant, and I'm glad Mr. Tyson's company is making the initiative to move forward with this and get it developed.
Yes, I also want to wish Mr. Tyson and Kowinski Construction good luck. And please let us know as soon as you get the ink dried, just so we can have an idea of what's coming in there, if you would, please.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson.
Commissioner Alsager? Barry, you're
Okay, I'm good now. Thank you. I just wanted to say I will be supporting this motion.
all right. Seeing no other hands up for discussion, we'll move to a roll call vote on the motion.
All right, we will start with Commissioner Lalone,
Yes.
Commissioner Gillis,
Yes.
Commissioner Altiger,
Yes.
Commissioner Tolis,
Yes.
Commissioner Ronan,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Perschbacher,
Yes.
Mayor Joseph.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Next on our agenda is item number 11, which is to receive a report on downtown parking lots and enforcement, and to consider changes to parking lot 10 and partial refunds. Manager Ridley, would you like to give us a few comments?
Yes, thank you. Last fall, we presented a number of updates on downtown parking, particularly as it related to our inability to no longer chalk tires for enforcement. And the memo provided in your packet from Downtown Development Director Michelle Sponseller outlines the requested 6-month evaluation we did of many of those changes. The reason it's on your agenda tonight is we're recommending that 2 items be changed from what was implemented back as a result of that analysis. And the first change is that we recommend that parking lot 10, which is the lot that's located between, I would say, west of Town Center and east of the Riverview Apartments. There's a city-owned parking lot there, parking lot 10, that we had changed to a permit lot as a result of that initial evaluation. And our thinking was that if individuals had a permit and would have guaranteed parking spaces available, that it might alleviate some of the congestion in Town Center and on the streets. Upon the evaluation, it appears that the exact opposite occurred, that people were not interested in buying permits to be able to park in that lot. And as a matter of fact, that lot often had only a couple of cars in it, and our congestion at town center on the streets actually increased. So we're recommending that that parking lot revert back to being a 10-hour parking lot, which we think will have a more positive impact on the on-street parking in town center. And as a result of that change, if you approve the change back to the 10-hour lot, we would also recommend that we refund 8 individuals who bought permits for that lot, because they indicated the specific reason they were buying them was because of lot 10. And those permits were not expected to expire until October of 2020. So we think it's appropriate to do a prorated refund to those 8 permit holders if they desire. So we are recommending that you approve the motion as presented, which would revert it to a 10-hour lot and authorize the appropriate refunds for those 8 permit holders.
Commissioner Toles,
I'll make a motion to confirm the reinstatement of parking lot 10 as a 10-hour lot and authorize prorated refunds for the 8 permit holders as recommended.
okay. Commissioner Alsager,
I will second the motion.
Commissioner Gillis, okay. Commissioner Roden,
Yeah, I support it, but I had some questions about, there's something about not enforcing 3-hour, 10-hour that was embedded in there. I didn't quite, I know it's tied in with chalking tires or something like that, but the university has a system where it's simply an app you download. To be honest, I haven't talked to the parking enforcement at the university to check on it though. But has the city thought about moving toward that at all, so that we're not having signs that we don't enforce type thing? I mean,
We did consider that when we looked at different enforcement capabilities last fall. And what I can do, Commissioner Ronan, is share with you the report that we gave last fall about why we didn't think that was the best option at this time. I'm sorry, I forgot you and Commissioner Alsager were not a part of that conversation. So I will be certain to get you the full report on that. And if you have additional questions after you see that, we can certainly address those additional questions.
thank you very much.
all right, seeing no other discussion, we move to a roll call vote to approve the changes to lot 10 and for the prorated refunds.
Okay. Commissioner Gillis,
Yes.
Commissioner Alsager,
Yes.
Commissioner Toles,
Yes.
Commissioner Ronan,
Yes.
Commissioner Lalone,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Perschbacher,
Yes.
Mayor Joseph.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next on our agenda is announcements on city-related issues and new business. Right. Manager Ridley.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully sometime we'll be able to stop giving these COVID-related updates in the near future. But there still are a number of moving pieces. So I thought it was important to bring you and the community up to date on where we are. And starting with service levels, as you know, we continue to increase our staffing as the restrictions continue to be lifted from the governor's executive orders. And at this point in time, most of our what I would call our more outdoor and more of our field staff are back to full time and have been prioritizing the work based on any existing restrictions. Most of our city hall office staff and our public safety record staff are still doing a combination of working remotely with some time in the office, but trying to serve the public remotely as much as possible. We continue to encourage citizens and business owners to use as much of those remote capabilities as possible because that's what the governor's order recommends at this time. But we have started to have staff spend more time in the offices of both Public Safety Records and City Hall starting this week, and there will be additional time next week. So we will have limited appointments available. If anybody has some face-to-face business that they want taken care of, we can set up those appointments to do that. And then our current plan right now is to open the doors on June 22nd so that there will be free public access, so to speak. But we will expect the public to wear face masks when they come into the building. And we will have some available if someone forgets theirs or does not have it readily available. And this will be to keep the staff safe and to continue to keep the community at large safe. I'm happy to tell you that we had our first farmers market last Thursday. And I think for the first week, it went very well with all of the new guidelines that we had to implement. The shoppers can show up without an appointment. It's just because we limit the number of shoppers who can be in the pavilion at one time, there may be a wait. So we have encouraged people to register ahead of time, and that seemed to go fairly smooth last week. For our first week, we had 645 shoppers, the staff tells me, which is pretty good considering we were encouraging only one family member per family. So that's a great turnout for the first day. And as importantly, we accept supplemental nutrition assistance program and double up food bucks. And last week was the highest day we've had with those kinds of purchases through the SNAP program and the double up program. Our previous high was in 2016, and we surpassed that by over 60%. So the staff was very excited about that. 2 weeks ago, you approved the use of outdoor space in an expedited process, and we waived some fees for it. As of noon today, the staff reports that we've approved or are in very serious conversations working toward approval for 8 to 9 individual businesses to utilize some of that outdoor space. Some of it's private space and some of it's the public space. So we expect that to be well received. What we've been working on the end of last week and this week is working toward opening more of our outdoor park facilities. So we're working on increasing our seasonal staff so that we can begin to look at opening up some of our park restrooms. We're working toward opening our skate park and our dog park with appropriate signages. And we're also, believe it or not, working toward opening the splash park that we hope we can do in a safe manner with social distancing. We are recalculating occupancies for our pavilion rentals to allow for proper social distancing so we can reinvigorate some of those reservations. And we're also working cooperatively with Union Township to have consistent guidelines for organizations such as baseball, Little League, and softball to begin using our field facilities for some games and or tournaments. And we're reviewing what city programming we can offer in a recreation standpoint in a safe manner. And lastly, recycling, because the county opened the MRF last Friday, we were able to reinstate our city curbside recycling pickup today. And we were very happy that we had the special one-time pickup 2 weeks ago because our backlog was not as large for MMI to have to deal with today. But we have encouraged residents who maybe have a large backlog because they are heavy recyclers or they maybe miss the special pickup. We've encouraged them to try to space out their recycling if possible at the curbside or to consider taking it directly to the MRF. But it looks like we are back on a normal schedule for curbside recycling pickup, which is great news. And then lastly, as I've mentioned at both of the last 2 meetings, we continue to encourage both our staff and all of our community members to have patience and be compassionate. Many people are very anxious to return to normal, but as one of the commissioners mentioned earlier, we are not back to normal yet. And what was normal may not be normal for us for a very long time. So we have to adjust to this new normal. So I think it's now more important than ever to be compassionate and kind recognizing that each person we come in contact with has a different story, whether it relates to the coronavirus or whether it relates to racial inequities in our nation. And I think it's important that we all act in ways to support and promote each other, because it all starts with what we can do as individuals at the local level. So I would just encourage us all to keep that in mind as we move forward. And that concludes my update on where we are with the coronavirus. And I would be happy to answer any questions if the commission has any.
Thank you, Nancy. I just wanted to give a couple comments. I just want to thank our community for this past week. Obviously, we've had a lot of conversations about racial disparities and violence in our community. And in the past week or so, we've shown as a community that we can get together in a peaceful way, but to also unite behind a message for change and to really call out the issues of racism and violence that we're seeing around the country, even around the state. I've been to a few different cities lately, and you can see major differences in how those communities and their relationships with their police departments. And so I want to give a lot of credit to Paul Loria and the police officers that work with him on a daily basis, and also our community's willingness to go out and protest wrongs that they see. Obviously, I think in Mount Pleasant, we don't have all the same issues that you see in other cities, but racism is pervasive everywhere in the country. And so it's important that we were there to be present and to be part of the conversation. And I think going forward, that will be the goal of the government here in the city level, and our staff is to be part of the conversation with our community, including our students, our residents, and others who work, shop, and play here. And that's really the important thing. We're going to be open to change and open to make sure that we recognize our history and the things that we can do better to serve our people. So just wanted to thank everyone for their showing over the last week. And given I know 2020 has been a crazy year, the last couple of months with the pandemic and everything else, this community just continues to impress me, and I'm really proud and honored to be a part of it. And I'm thankful for our staff and our city, just for everything you do. So that's really all I had tonight, and I'm going to recognize Commissioner Gillis.
Thank you. Also want to give a shout out to Director Lauria and law enforcement for the outstanding job they do to protect our community members and the outstanding people they are. I really appreciate each and every one of them. Community members, thank you for coming out together to show solidarity and the love for one another. It takes a village, and I truly believe that Mount Pleasant could have that as their motto, and we could find instances of that everywhere. I also want to encourage our community members to fill out the census if they haven't already. And please, if you know someone that hasn't filled out the census, please encourage them to do that. If they need any assistance, please contact City Hall. I'm sure any one of our secretary would be happy to help someone with their census. It takes barely 10 minutes, and you will definitely make an impact on our community and the resources we have. Please fill out your census and do so. I also want to remind people we have election in November. 2 commission seats will be available. They from City Hall was open from our clerk, Howard. And Jerry, could you please give us information on when those packets will be available and when the deadline is, please?
I don't have the date right off the top of my head. I know we're putting those packets together right now. I can try and find the deadline real quick and get back to you.
Sorry about that, Jeremy.
No problem.
The primary, what is August 3rd?
August 4th.
Okay, it's on a Tuesday. So please give that some consideration. The City Commission is a nonpartisan board. So if you have some time and you'd like to join our team, the community members to step up and help us be a team and get the people done, see the people please. I also wanted to encourage people to wear face masks. Our community supermarkets, restaurants, retail establishments, when we get back into them, so far, places such as all of the staff working there have masks. They are protecting us by wearing their masks. I think the least we can do is help protect them by also wearing our masks. I want to reiterate, if you understand that COVID was asymptomatic, no symptoms. People with COVID, with the virus, can have absolutely no symptoms, no fever, no respiratory problems, nothing, and they could be walking around thinking they are healthy, but they are affecting everyone they can contact with, unless they're wearing masks. Mask distancing will save our economy. We have a flash of new infections. We will be down in the same conditions ourselves for today. So please do the small part of wearing your facial mask. I know it's uncomfortable. I know we're not used to it. Just know the face mask you wear today could save a life tomorrow. Please consider others and do the simple request of wearing a face mask. And lastly, a wonderful shout out to our 2020 graduates, high school, fifth graders moving into middle school, and our college graduates, which I have 2 of them this year. So happy 2020. Your future looks bright. If you can overcome this, you can overcome anything. So go out and make it. There you go.
Commissioner Elsager.
Thank you. I do want to mention to Commissioner Gillis that her mic was breaking up. It was very hard to hear her, I'm sorry to say. I just wanted to, again, compliment our community in general. I think I could say I'm small town proud that we had 2 demonstrations and marches, and it wasn't just the police, it also was some of the commissioners and our mayor that got involved in that. So I was very proud resident. Thank you.
Commissioner Gillis.
One more quick comment on the protest on Sunday. I, as Commissioner Ronan, spent about 2.5 hours observing from the first protest that was in the area in front of the Red Lobster. I'm glad, I pray to God that, you know, this community is great. We don't have the problems that other communities have. We just have a great community here. But I observed, you know, there was 5 or 6 gentlemen that were not from in town here. They were sort of controlling this, and I got kind of worried because, quote, I cannot tell you not to riot when you get downtown. And I have to commend Commissioner Chief Loria, because I was there for 2.5 hours and observed, and I saw 1 motorcycle officer go by 1 time. So, I mean, they were given a lot of space. And I have no problem with protesters, but when we get out of town people that are hired to come here and cause problems, I seriously worried about that. And it was totally under control, 100%. I have to thank the chief and all the rest of the police officers again, as I mentioned before. Thank you.
All right, we can move now into our public comment section. And it does not appear that we have anyone from the public in our meeting currently. Manager, really, did we have any comments sent in?
Yes, Mayor, we did have one communication that was sent in this evening that I will read to you. And his email indicated it was on an item not related to the agenda, so that's why I saved it for this part of the agenda. It's from Jeff Fisher, who lives at 308 South Oak Street, and his communication is as follows. I write to the commission today to encourage them to consider, in light of the recent nationwide protests in reaction to systemic injustice, investigating and implementing police reform measures such as 8 Can't Wait, a collection of evidence-based practices that have been shown to increase the safety of policing. These include banning chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation, requiring warning before shooting, requiring exhausting all alternatives before shooting, requiring officers to intervene when witnessing police misconduct, banning shooting at moving vehicles, requiring a use of force continuum, and requiring comprehensive reporting. If these policies are already in place within the Mount Pleasant Police Department, their existence could be made more visible to the public. After a cursory glance at the Division of Public Safety's website and the city ordinances, I was unable to find any information about the department's policies around the use of force. Considering that the police department is the sole entity within the city government entrusted with using force, the requirements around that use of force should be more readily available to citizens. Researching and implementing possible reforms should not be read as an indictment of our current officers or any observed behavior. Instead, implementing such evidence-based reform should be seen as a measure to ensure that some terrible incident, like those we've seen with such disturbing regularity across the country, never occurs here. It's an opportunity for our public safety personnel to be an exemplary model for other cities and counties across the country to look toward. These should be seen as proactive measures of solidarity, indicating that we are attuned to the concerns of citizens of all races across the country. By enacting our increasing public awareness of such measures, we're not saying this is an issue in our community. We're saying we refuse to ever let this become an issue in our community. And again, those were comments from Jeff Fisher. And that's the only communication I had, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Manager Ridley. Director Merdeza, I see your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of Andy Tyson, he had another engagement. He asked if I would, on his behalf, express his appreciation for the support that you gave the land purchase earlier in the agenda. So I just wanted to pass that on to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I think we'll recess for about 5 minutes and we will reconvene by 8:08, 8:09 for our work session to discuss the 2019 goals reports and next steps. It appears we have our commissioners here. I would guess that our staff is here as well. So we will reconvene for our discussion on the 2019 goals reports and next steps. As anyone who's read that our work session packet would know, it starts off with the housing report put together by our city planner, Jacob Kane. And I just want to first say thank you, Jacob. It was a great report. There's a lot of good information there. I've read it before, but I feel like I always pick up new information every time I go through it. And I think it paints a really good picture of the issues related to housing in our community. And so thank you for your work on that. We have a lot to cover tonight, so we will try to get through this as much as we can. Manager Ridley, did you have any comments before we start off?
No, as you indicated, Mayor, there's a lot to get through, and we will not be surprised if we don't get through everything on the work session agenda, but we wanted you to have the full packet and we can carry stuff over to the next one. But my suggestion would be we just go through the discussion questions in the order suggested. And we're just looking for some general guidance from you tonight on what types of things you are most interested in having us pursue, so that we can use our time on things that you have general agreement on instead of something that you absolutely have no interest in. So we're just looking for some general guidance tonight on each of these issues.
Okay. Thank you, Manager Ridley. The first thing on the discussion questions is the memorandum put together by Director Merdeza and from Jacob Kane. And really the first question is does the commission have an interest in addressing the demand for low-income housing types in the community? And if so, is there a willingness to consider program or policy changes that are necessary for developers to propose projects of this nature in Mount Pleasant? And if not, are there other suggestions for this demand, how this demand might be addressed? If you recall from the report, the housing stock in Mount Pleasant, there is a significant amount of our community that is overly burdened by housing costs. Where is it in my notes? No. So from those making $35,000 or less in our community, many of those people under 20,000, 95% means there's 95% of the people making less than $20,000 in our community are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And people making 20 to 35,000 are spending 72%, or 72% of those people are spending 30% or more on housing costs. And so that really iterates a lot of people in our community are in need of low-income housing, and there's a shortage of really homes that fit that category, and our apartment supply is heavily between the $500 and $875 range per month. Commissioner Ronan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think a lot of, so to address the first question, I'd probably go to question number 2. I certainly have no positive thoughts about turning parking lots into downtown parking lots into housing development projects for low income, because I think parking is the thing. So while I wouldn't be against low income housing necessarily, I think I probably want the private sector to be more involved in that than turning public property into it. And the second thing is I think with the changes at the university and the changes in number of students, the number of apartments available are likely to increase supply. And, you know, there's that supply and demand thing that seems to work occasionally, where you've got an increased supply with low demand, prices go down. Now, I'm not sure that's the case, but anyway, I think those are two things when I think about low-income housing that just cross my mind anyway. So I guess maybe including developers in this conversation, maybe including real estate agents and the, you know, other people who actually know what the demand is out there. And, you know, but
I think there's a lot of things that we are going to cover tonight that are probably, if we decide to move forward with them or express interest, that are going to probably require more conversations down the road. And, you know, the first thing that really comes up under question 2 is, yes, you know, is the city willing to sell property that it owns in the downtown area? And the downtown area is of value because it's walkable. And, you know, lot number 3, which is town center, comes up a couple of times probably in our discussion tonight. Other lots are number 5 and 6. 6, I know, is slated to be reconstructed, I think, next year. And so the timing may be a little bit not perfect for maybe necessarily that lot, but is there any other interest in discussing, you know, public selling some of our own land in the downtown area or otherwise for development? I'll recognize Commissioner Tolis. He's got his hand up.
I have to agree in essence with a few things with Commissioner Ronan. We don't need to take parking lots and convert them to low income housing. I think the market will drive itself. And I don't know where we keep coming up with all these facts that we're short on low income housing. The last thing was when I first got on this commission, there's a middle void. I still haven't seen that middle void. And as Commissioner Ronan said, what's the enrollment going to be at CMU? A lot of these parents of the students are out of work. The students haven't got work this summer. Where are they going to get the money to come back to school? And you don't think market prices are going to go down. There's no doubt about that. That's just a no-brainer. But again, I think market drives the demand. If there's a demand for it, the builders and independent people will build them. I don't think there's a big demand for this. Same with that middle void. I still haven't seen that.
I think the void that's in the reports and is of, you know, many discussions is really, if you look at in the report, there are a lot of single family homes and there are a lot of multi-unit complexes in our community, and really from duplexes to mid-size housing or mid-rise housing. Those are things that are you know, have for various reasons are not in our community, and I think they allow opportunities for people to, you know, for developers to decrease their costs for development and allow for people who are going to rent those items or potentially purchase, they can get a better deal. And I think that's the idea behind, you know, sort of increasing the middle income, the middle housing categories. Commissioner Alsager?
I think I do see what the missing middle is meant as a concept, and what the various types of housing are that Mount Pleasant is lacking. But at the same time, what the other commissioners have said about this being a strange time and us having kind of a glut of empty apartments, I don't know that we'll be successful right now in changing policy to encourage building. I think there would be a lot of hesitancy in that. So that's my comment.
Commissioner Gillis.
Yes, please let me know if my microphone stops working, okay? I am not interested in changing any downtown parking lots to low-income housing. I want to remind the city commissioners that we have several apartment complexes, huge, large apartment complexes dedicated to low-income housing. Chase Run is one along Isabella, Oxford Row. There are Riverview. There are several apartment buildings completely empty right now that used to house students that no longer have any tenants. So I don't think giving developers tax abatements to build more apartments for low-income housing is a solution right now. Economy and marketplace is unknown at this point. To go into planning stages of anything like this, low-income apartments or pilots, is premature to find out where we're going to be 6 months from now, maybe even a year, to know what.
Lori,
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, but we haven't really got to the discussion on pilots or abatements yet. We're sort of just talking about putting potentially city-owned property up for sale or marketing it.
Okay. Well, I'm not for that. And I will reiterate, which you've heard me several times on this city commission level, that low-income tenants, if they're working, they should be having a living wage so as we do not have to subsidize their rents, or developers, which is corporate socialism, when we give them money to make those apartments and those buildings. It is no different than corporate socialism, in a different manner, going up the ladder instead of down. So I really think we should pause on these factors during this crisis. But again, I'm not interested in giving any of our parking lots to a developer for low-income housing, which would then entail a tax abatement.
I guess I might find myself in the minority here at the commission, but I do find that Lot 3 Town Center, I think, has the ability to turn into something different than what it currently is. It's currently a parking lot, and we're slated to redesign that next year according to our capital improvement plan. And a lot of discussions in the community have really saw that as an opportunity for something different besides a parking lot. Currently, it's a cost to the city. It's not making us any money. I don't know if the correct answer for Lot 3 is necessarily, some housing that's going to be either abated or have a pilot. But I think I would encourage the commission to have an open eye about Lot 3 and really to see that there's possibilities there to really develop our downtown in a way that could be really transformative. So that's my thoughts. Commissioner Tolis.
Yes, Mayor. I'll give you for instance, you're talking about converting Lot 3. Well, the city over the past 50 years has paid good money to buy adjacent houses to add parking, and we still have a parking problem once in a while. I'll give you for instance, the building lot across from the Blackstone was purchased by a person out of Detroit that was trying to draw a marijuana license. He paid $165 for the property and demoed it for another $80. He's got $245,000 in that lot right now, and the lot is back for sale for $100,000. So why doesn't a developer go spend $100,000, buy that, and put a 5-story building for low income? Because there's not a demand for it. I mean, we shouldn't be involved in this stuff, period. You know, you're trying to drive a market and you can't drive the market. It just doesn't make sense to me. Even if you give pilot programs and everything else, you look at Oxford Row and Canterbury and Winchester, all those were subsidized and they were filling the middle void. Now they're all subsidized. There's no middle income people living there. It's all subsidized. And it doesn't make a difference because they're getting subsidized. They'll pay $80 or $100 a month and live there. And then the government pays the rest. I don't know. I don't understand this. The market's going to drive it. Same with student rentals. A lot of students don't come back. The prices are going to drop. And then they're going to have to look for other people if they don't have enough to fill those houses. Something's going to have to happen there. You can't just leave them empty. I know one lady that owns some developments out by Masuba. She's got 7 or 8 apartment complexes there, and she only had 2 last year. And the year before, they were rented out. The other were vacant. You know, you can't, I don't know. That's just my thought on it. We just can't take vital parking lots downtown and then convert them into low-income housing. It just doesn't make any sense to me, none whatsoever. I have nothing against low-income people, but there's a lot of apartments out there that are subsidized that weren't subsidized before. A lot of complexes.
I just have one question off a comment that Commissioner Tolis made. And it reminded me, why is it that I know the city has fielded a few requests we've got interest from developers to put, some sort of building for housing in our community. And is it that they're specifically looking for property that we own, or is it just because the down area is attractive and there's not a lot of open spaces currently?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, they're primarily the folks we're working with. They're not building market housing. So I know there's been a lot of comments about responding to the market. These are folks who are building housing for people who the marketplace won't serve, because the amount of rent that can be paid is not the amount of rent that will pay for someone to build at market rates. So you can't build this type of housing and then charge a market rate and serve these households. They're looking downtown primarily because they're looking for a certain walk score in the the state of Michigan grant scoring to get the low-income housing grants that you need to make these developments work. You essentially have to build them in a downtown area to get the grant. So they're zeroed in on downtown. If you look at our downtown, you're going to find that the vast majority of land that's not already covered with building area is going to be city owned. So they've either come to us and asked if we know of land that's available for this type of development, or they've looked at the map themselves and they've identified that there's a lot of land dedicated to parking that might be suitable for their needs.
Jacob, is it also accurate to say that those state of Michigan programs that help make those projects work also typically require some kind of a local contribution to the project as well?
Yes, and basically when we've fielded these inquiries over the 5.5 years I've worked here, we've probably averaged 2 a year. And when the interested parties learn either A, that there's not property available, or B, that there's not a pilot available, then they move on to another community.
Thank you, Jacob. That's helpful. Commissioner Alsager?
I just have a thought that I know one of the goals of helping the missing middle is to not always have them renting, but to have some options for home ownership. And maybe that can be worked on in the next year and a half, 2 years in the neighborhood between downtown and campus. So it helps with that walkability issue, but then some of the conversions that would help, landlords sell buildings to homeowners and help the missing middle that way. Is that doable?
Well, I think that's that we're working down the list. And I think when we get to homeowner conversions, that's certainly helpful, because part of that discussion is, location and what type of investment the city is willing to look at. So I appreciate those comments, Commissioner Alsager. Jacob?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the missing middle concept has come up a number of times already tonight, and I just, for the benefit of the conversation, wanted to be clear that the term missing middle is referring to the housing itself, not the income of the tenant or owner of the housing. So when we talk about missing middle housing, we're talking about triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, granny flats, or rear accessory apartments. Those could be units that are low income, middle income, high income. But we're not talking about trying to target the middle income strata of the city. We're talking about a variety of housing types that nationwide over the last 50 to 70 years have primarily been illegal to construct. And so they've been missing because they couldn't be built any longer because of zoning laws that were adopted nationwide.
Commissioner Ronan?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on item number 5, I guess, which is what Mary was talking about. And I think item number 4, I think there are things within there that would make some sense. And I think in terms of talking about specific styles of homes, or, whether you have a quadruplex or a duplex or I don't think the city is competent or are the people who necessarily would be designing. I want to see heavy input from the builders, right? I want to see heavy input from real estate agents. I'd want to see heavy input from marketing people to know what people want. And I understand how structures of homes differ, and they can be all different ways, but so I'm interested in it, but I'm interested in it from a larger perspective of, and the city's certainly not going to build them. And if we're talking about tax incentives or things like that, I'm much more interested in dealing with real estate we have that's not rentable than creating new real estate. But that's just my 2 cents.
I want us to kind of follow the outline that we have in the packet. And so I know we've probably spent enough time on item number 2, which is really selling city-owned property. It seems that there isn't much support on the commission for that at this time. And so really the next item that I think is list is really talking about paying overnight parking in areas outside of the downtown. And I think we should discuss that before we really get to specific programs that would encourage missing middle housing or some of the other things. So if that's all right with the commission, so I think we've sort of beat to death maybe number 2. We can talk about the on-street parking.
Mayor, could I just interject one question, please? Back to question number 1 about the low-income housing. Something I probably should have included in the commission packet and I forgot to is we had previously received a communication from the director of the Housing Commission who runs Riverview and Pheasant Run that talked about the long waiting list for individuals looking for low-income housing. And so I think I would just like to go back to that for a minute. I understand not wanting to use city-owned property, but is there any interest in exploring any type of options that the city may have available to help address that low income housing need? Or is the commission saying that they think over time the market will take care of that based on the apartment situation? I was just looking for a little bit of clarity on that before we move on, if I could, please.
And I guess to that point, I would say, yes, I'm interested in doing something like that. And I don't, if that's talking about pilot programs or abatements, or at least entertaining, proposals put forward by developers, I think that you have my support for at least looking at that. See a few hands up that have been up for a little bit. So Commissioner Gillis.
Yes, first, I'd like to address some of the statistics that we use, because the statistics that were in our packet are completely different than the statistics from the census. What our median income is, how many homeowners we have. So there is a difference of statistics from what's included in our packet. I also want to comment that we've had the director of Riverview come before us and state there's a 2-year waiting period to get into Riverview. I know a tenant that took 9 months to get in from the time he was put in a medical care facility and was looking for, and then into a nursing home and then into Riverview, was a matter of months, 9 months from start of the medical condition. So I am not confident that the information that we had, that there is a 2-year waiting list for Riverview, is accurate. I also have a friend who is a social worker in Harrison, and was told that many communities, outlying communities around Mount Pleasant, some of the rural communities, Harrison, Beaverton, Coleman, you can go south, they don't have low-income subsidized housing. So when their community members are looking for low-income subsidized housing, housing that is used with taxpayer money to help accommodate living, they are being sent to Mount Pleasant to apply for subsidized housing. So it's not necessarily our community members that we are having numbers for. We are having numbers that are artificially inflated because the rural areas around us are telling people to come here and look for Section 8 and subsidized housing. I also want to comment that developers say that they can't make the numbers work because they need the profit margins to be as large as possible. So they want us to build part of their buildings, just like we gave the tax abatement to Parcel B. There are investors that use these places for tax shelters. Chase Run is one. They have investors from even outside of the state of Michigan for tax credits, tax shelters. Chase, well, that's a discussion for the pilots, but I don't believe it is within the city's purview, or is the city's purview, to get into marketplaces such as housing developments. I think that is more driven by markets and developers. And I also think that the taxpayer should not be responsible for that. It comes down to making a living wage so these people can afford a place to live, afford a car to get them back and forth to work. And that if we keep relying on grants, which, let me remind everyone in the community, grants is taxpayer money. That's your money that is being given to a developer so that they can build an apartment complex and make tons of money. Ask any landlord if it's a lucrative business. They will say yes. Ask any landlord of subsidized housing if they're not making money. They are. Chase Run got through somehow in Lansing got considered a nonprofit entity, Chase Run. And everyone knows how large Chase Run is, and they pay no taxes because they are nonprofit. And they just came back a couple years ago and asked an extension on their pilot that ran for 20 years because they didn't set aside money to replace HVACs and roofing and doors and things. So 20 years, they took all that profit, and then they came back to the city commission and said, we want to extend a pilot because we didn't consider these expenses. So they're in the business of apartment complexes and being a landlord, yet they didn't consider the expenses of having to replace the roof after 20 years. And they come back to the city commission and ask for an extension on their pilots so the city taxpayers can pay that. I have a problem with increasing pilots and increasing abatements for people to make more money off of our taxpayer dime. Thanks for listening.
Commissioner Toles.
Thank you. I want to make a quick point, and it's an important point. I have to agree with Commissioner Gillis and Commissioner Ronan. Part of the problem is we had these high rises, and they were initially built for senior citizens. And now there's a few seniors in there, but there's a lot of subsidized people in there. That's one point. The second point is that Mr. Ronan made. We have to work with the builders. The builders are the ones that pull the building permits and build these duplexes and build these houses. So let's look at our building permits that have been issued here, you know, from these last 2 years to before in the past. Most of these builders won't build them because they can't build what the person wants to build because of roof designations. Duplex they can't build because you got to be owner occupied. I mean, there's the problem. You're not working with the builders and bringing them in. It's a deterrent. So how are you trying to increase it when you issue 3 or 4 building permits in this city? Nothing's being built. You're not generating any tax revenue. That's the problem. You've got to work with the people here.
Commissioner Ronan?
Yeah, I'm all about people making money. So if I'm not coming across that way, I apologize. Mount Pleasant's designated an opportunity zone. So if someone, you know, which is a huge tax incentive for people who want to invest money, right? So if someone wanted to come together with a creative proposal, I'm not saying I wouldn't be interested in it, but you know, we've got it seems to me we've got a cascading problem here. One is when I talk to landlords, what they're telling me about is they're worried. They're not saying, geez, I want to go build something. They're saying to me, hey, I'm worried. I've got housing that I can't rent. I've got apartments that I can't rent. So talking to me about building under this climate, I mean, again, if it's an opportunity zone, which Mount Pleasant City Center is designated an opportunity zone, huge tax abatements for everybody, right? I mean, there's lots of ways in which that could develop, but it has to be a creative proposal that takes into account the current context. That's all I'm arguing for. So I apologize. And I'm going to be quiet for the rest of the meeting, at least until we're off this.
Okay. Commissioner Elsager.
Well, I think I have just a question. I understand what Pete is saying, but I guess my question is, do we need policy changes so that builders, when they're ready, can build the missing middle type of buildings? Does that make sense?
So I feel like I feel like this discussion is sort of, we've gone over a little bit of all over the road, and now I rethink, you know, sort of what question one is really getting at is, if you move to the previous page, there's 4 different policies that you know, could address low income housing. Their pilot program, there is conversion of city-owned land to downtown Mount Pleasant for new housing. There's 2 other we really haven't talked about, which is, one is the reduce or eliminate land area unit requirements for multiple family housing units. And then there's also the eliminate overnight on-street parking prohibition. And I guess, I think we sort of talked, those other two, I think everyone has almost expressed their opinion except for a few. So just so staff knows exactly where everybody's sort of at and where the numbers are at in terms of interest. If people are willing to reconsider the city's policy on pilots, if you would like to just say so, because currently we don't entertain any pilots. So that means if a developer comes by and says, hey, I want to do something, the automatic response is no. If we are willing to change that policy, it doesn't commit us to any specific project, but at least you have the ability to look at it and say, weigh your options. And so I, for one, I'm willing to reconsider the city's policy on pilots and be open to at least those proposals. I think Commissioner Tolis has expressed his opinion that he is not in favor of that. Commissioner Gillis, the same. George, I'm not sure where you landed on that specific item.
I would not be in favor at this time, simply
Okay.
because of the context.
Okay. Commissioner Alsager?
I think I would agree with Commissioner Ronan that it could be appropriate at another time, but I think for now we do kind of need to see what's going to be happening in our city.
I believe that's Commissioner Lalone or Vice Mayor Perschbacher have comments.
I'm not in favor of it either, so.
Even though I'm in favor of us bringing together everyone in the city and working out problems, right now I'd like to take a step back from that because of the fact that we do have some revenues that we're just not sure of. We're not, we don't know how our flow of money is going to come next year. And I would also like to state, we are looking at getting some assistance from some graduate students that may be able to give us an understanding of how to bring everyone together. And that's something that I'm interested in looking at before we push further into any pilot programs.
I would, my feeling is a little bit more than the rest of the commission. We have a population that's adjusted about 20% poverty rate. And so I really do think that there is a need to address this issue. And so I would urge commissioners that when possible, that we do address this issue in the future. The next item I think we can talk about is the on-street parking for overnight. And this really covers the middle housing and the owner occupied, because a lot of our planning documents really encourage on-street parking. And I think it's also something that some of our community members have expressed frustration about in the past. I just had a couple of questions for staff, in that if we did move to open up on-street parking overnight, how would we handle issues with snow removal and street cleaning? And I know in the downtown, there's been, alerts like emails, or there's signs for odd and even days. And you see that in other cities where one side of the street is designated on even days and the other side is designated for odd days to allow for those things to happen. And would those be sort of the things that the city would look at to implement that policy if we do?
Mayor, I guess let me jump in on that first. I think we would need to look at those options like you identified. I think our experience with downtown has found that the odd and even is confusing for the average individual. but what we did last winter as a trial basis, in where we put out alerts when we needed people to move cars so that we could do snow plowing, that seemed to work well. It was a fairly small population for our trial period, but as the report on parking indicated in the packet, it seemed to go okay. So my gut reaction is that likely has more potential validity for us as we move forward. But we haven't done all of the research or the analysis to know if that's exactly what we would recommend or not. But certainly if the commission's willing to consider changing those on-street parkings, we can bring some options available to you and outline the pros and cons for you of each of them.
Commissioner Toles, you see your hand up?
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
It's
turn.
okay.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Commissioner Alsager.
I understand the issue about, parking problems, but I also understand that that's one of the features of helping the process of getting, users and renters and people in other facilities that they're living in, giving them a place to park. So we need to, I think, make some changes in that. And I'm sorry if my on-street traffic is so noisy tonight.
Commissioner Ronan?
Yeah, I sort of agree with what Mary said. I don't understand what the concern. I guess there's some people who don't have enough room in their driveway or something, or they have too many cars and they want to park on the street. I mean, is that the issue? Or I don't.
Yeah, so some of the issues is you have families who have multiple cars and they don't have room necessarily in their driveway. Also, this, if you don't have, if you're a developer and you're developing a parcel, if you don't have to make space for necessarily a driveway, then you can potentially put more units and it becomes cheaper per acreage to do that development, and it increases.
I apologize for interrupting, but I mean, I'm in favor of the first thing. I mean, if someone's got a family member who's got an extra car or something and needs to park on the street, I think it's great. But requiring builders not to have enough parking spots per unit, I see, that's what I mean. The devil's in the details, right? So I'd probably say, yeah, let's look for those, for number one. Number two, I say to the developer, providing parking is part of what you have to do if you're going to develop a property. I mean, am I missing something, Jacob?
I mean, I would just add two points. One is that the expense of developing the parking often leads to higher rent. That cost is passed through. So to the extent that you don't have to build parking with units, you can look at any housing study that's been done in the last 10 years, and they'll show when they look at the cost of parking that that's going to lead to higher rents. You're talking about probably $10,000 a parking space minimum for upfront capital costs plus maintenance. And so for folks who may not need a car or may need less cars, given when people have the ability to build less parking, a developer is more willing to take that risk of building less parking if they know there's an alternative that's available to the tenant.
But that means that means the city pays for the parking space, right? So we maintain the street, we maintain anything they put into maintaining.
We're already doing that, though. I mean, essentially, we're talking about just activating the parking space that's already available to folks 8 months a year, making it available 12 months a year. We also just, in terms of counter traffic, when you consider that the vast majority of the central part of the city was developed at a time when families had 0 or 1 car, and now there are many families in that neighborhood that have 3 or 4 cars. We hear from those folks that even if they have the space on site to park those cars, if you have a single wide driveway, that's probably likely all you can fit on a lot in that neighborhood. It's very inconvenient when you have multiple drivers. And so this would give those folks more flexibility. It would give the potential to lower some costs. One of the other points I just leave you with is back in 2015, we had a community walk around where we talked about some of the redevelopment activity north of campus. And one of the things that stood out in that walk around was a number of the neighboring residents. One of their number one complaints about the design of the new properties was the amount of parking. They lost a house that had a backyard and they got a house that had a parking lot instead. And it just didn't fit with their neighborhood. And so to the extent that you can reduce the amount of backyards and front yards and side yards that are paved, you can do a lot of good things. But one of the things you can do that we have heard from folks that they like is you can maintain some semblance of that neighborhood feel by having less of the yard paved.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I guess, again, for me, the devil would be in the details. I'm in favor of doing, parking on the street, I guess, but I wouldn't want to see ordinances changed to say, okay, I'm going to put up a hotel or I'm going to put up an apartment building and I'm going to have everybody park on the side. I mean, the devil's in the details again for me, but I'll.
Commissioner Rowan, I would add that our current zoning ordinance has no parking requirements. So that is technically, that's the law of the land as of now. So really, this wouldn't change that. So
Well,
we're
it
already
would because they can't park on the street. They still have to accommodate parking, even though we didn't put parking requirements in the new zoning ordinance. They still can't park on the streets overnight.
Just for some months of the year.
Right. That was kind of the catch-all when the zoning ordinance was passed, that then builders wouldn't build apartment complexes or have all their tenants park on the street because it was a consideration that, well, they can't do that because they can't park on the streets during months that we're going to be snow plowing. And it also doesn't just make a hazard in snow time. We also cannot clean the streets if there are more parking on the streets. It's something that might be a detriment to how our neighborhoods look.
Commissioner Tolis.
Yeah, I live over on West Grand and East Grand over there. I'll give you, for instance, it's got a two-story house, the garage, facing East Grand that has a double driveway that they park 4 cars in. And there must be one other person in that household that has a car. So on cross lanes on the side street, there's another garage there that has another double driveway where they park the 5th car. But this all revolves and gets back to the zoning again. We limited the width of the driveways that you can put in. We're back to 18 foot. We're only 10 foot before. And there's places to build more parking, but the city won't allow it. If they would allow that, you wouldn't have the problem to park on the street. I mean, it all comes back to the zoning. And then you have apartments with no parking requirements. How much sense does that make? This stuff just doesn't make any sense. And it needs to be straightened out. It's going on 4 years now, and you've taken care of 2 problems, and you've got almost 10 problems there. And nothing gets done. And then we have to waste time on this stuff. That's, I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Jacob, for the residential driveways, we already reverted that back to what was in place before, didn't we?
It's 18 feet currently. And again, I'm just reporting back, as with the low income housing, what we hear when we're at the counter. We get people that get sent down to us from the clerk's office who've got a parking citation. They're not aware that there's overnight parking rules at certain times of the year. They've been parking on street all summer. They come to us, they don't have parking on their site. Their landlord may not want to build additional parking. In most cases, it's simple to say just add more parking, but many homes don't have the space to add more parking. And so if you don't have the space, you don't have the option. And there's really not an alternative for those folks whatsoever. I mean, we are kind of at the position of encouraging folks to reach out to neighboring businesses or churches and see if they can come up with some sort of arrangement, because they're just stuck. They don't have an alternative. And we're trying to find an alternative that's not going to cost them, $5,000 to $20,000 of site changes to make it happen.
And I think the important thing to remember is they can do it for 8 months of the year. It's just 4 months that they can't do it. So that creates even more confusion of what's different about those 4 months. So if we can solve the snow removal problem, there really is nothing different about those other 4 months.
Commissioner Lalone?
I'm in favor of doing the overnight parking. That's it.
Thank you, Kristen. Commissioner Ronan? No?
Yeah, I think I'd go along with Kristen. I mean, it seems overly complex in some way, but I mean, I at least come up with some ideas on what could be done. Sure. I mean, I don't. But...
Okay. So I'm in favor of changing overnight parking. It sounds like George and Kristen are. Mary, I see your hand up. In favor? Amy, I see some head nodding in favor. All right.
Yes. Yes.
All right. We can move on to the next issue, which is the per acreage unit per acre requirements, and I think that's that really addresses areas where I believe already allow multiple family dwellings. So I think you're talking about CD4 and CD5, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
And Mr. Mayor, I mean, there are density limits on residential dwellings in CD3L, CD3, CD4, and CD5. And for the most part, they mirror what was in place before in the 1984 ordinance. And I'm making the recommendation here because those do place a limit on a number of properties where it might make sense to have a duplex or triplex that are multifamily zoned. But because of the way the calculation works, they just don't hit that number. They might be 100 square foot shy. And it seems like there may be potential to create units and create some value on some of these properties that otherwise would be conducive to additional units. I'm not sure where the 15 unit acre per acre cap really arose from. It's 2,904 square feet per unit of land area. But it's been around for a really long time. I think since 1971. And I'm not sure that it has any validity beyond just being a number that's been in the code for a really long time.
So you're really talking about the other CD3, CD4, CD5.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would say there's in the planning world, it is moving toward not limiting density in districts, period, using other tools to get desirable outcomes that aren't based on numeric land areas. But in particular, the CD4 limit of 15 units per acre is a tad over restrictive in terms of getting the type of development that we already have in our neighborhoods. So just replicating the things that people said they liked in our neighborhoods is impossible in many cases because of that density cap.
Commissioner Elsteiger?
So I guess my question for Jacob would be, are you asking that we would just remove any restrictions or that we would change it?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, Commissioner Elsteiger, either of those I think would help. I mean, certainly. I gave the example years past to Commissioner Ling. We had some lengthy conversations about we have density rules for rooming dwellings, so the higher occupancy student dwellings, and you can actually get more tenants per acre with a rooming dwelling than you can with a multifamily dwelling. And so we had some back and forth conversation about that, and the fact that part of the reason I think why we have such a preponderance of rooming style dwellings is that they're cheaper to build because you've got one kitchen, one bathroom, potentially more these days, but back in the day, you'd have one bathroom, one furnace, one water heater, serving maybe 5 or 6 tenants. Whereas if you tried to service those 6 tenants in a triplex, you've got triple the cost for all those items. And we also made it illegal. we made it so that you could perhaps put 6 head on a property, but you could only get a duplex if you went multiple family. So increasing that limit would also change that dynamic so that we would have more housing that was more flexible, that had smaller unit occupancies that might be more suitable to a family or a non-student tenant in times like these when there's lower enrollment as well. So that's just another possible benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Malone? Hey, Kristen, you're muted. I can't hear you.
It was a mistake. It's fine. I didn't mean to have my hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, we have 4 minutes of this work session, so let's try to get through this subject and maybe leave the rest of it because there's a lot of details in I mean, we had a lot on that work session. I was kind of dismayed that we put so much on a work session that needed a discussion. So we might want to come to some decision on this last subject.
I'm gonna recognize Commissioner Ronan, and then we can discuss as a group if we want to.
Could you give me a list of builders who have requested this?
Right.
A list of builders who've requested.
Who've come to you and requested this change?
I mean, but I probably had a conversation with just about every developer or real estate agent in the community in 5.5 years about how many units can be placed on this property.
Okay.
And that standard is going to impact that.
Okay. Okay. And that's what would be impacted. So, okay, great. So they want to put more students in a smaller space, sort of.
No, I mean, this is generally people who are trying to, they find a property that might be suitable for a duplex or triplex, and they call to find out what's possible. I run the land area calculation and tell them, well, you can have this many units, and it's often less than might
what they want.
Make sense.
Okay.
Commissioner Gillis brought up that we are approaching an hour into this discussion. I feel that we're making some progress here, and because we do have a lot to talk about, and because it is only a little bit after 9, I would be interested in at least giving ourselves maybe another half hour to continue to talk about items. If there's support for that, now would be the time to express that. George?
I don't see it. I don't have anything against it. So, I mean, I don't.
None of these subjects are pressing. None of these subjects at all are pressing. We can add these to the next work session.
Well, I would say the next work session is also there's a lot of questions there, and we have a lot of things to discuss, and I think that, you know, since we have the time, we should continue to work.
I don't have the time. Sorry, I have something planned tonight, you guys. I'm supposed to be somewhere right now. I'm not supposed to be home. So. Cute cat, Kristen.
I agree. These things aren't pressing either. So I'd say I'm in favor of moving the rest of these to another meeting, personally.
It's 9:10. Motion to adjourn.
Is there any more input on whether or not we should? I know where Lori and Kristen are. Me and George are willing to stay. I need to hear from everybody before we move on. Mary?
I'm available, but I do sympathize with those who are not.
You already got 2 two commissioners that have to be somewhere else. And we just seem like we're just rehashing stuff over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
And nothing's getting cured. Just like Mr. Kane just told you. Well, I have to tell these people you're 100 square foot short. That's 10 by 10. Is that serious? You know, staff needs to get this stuff figured out and get the zoning figured out. I mean, it's just been too damn long. And I'm sick of this. When we can be doing other stuff, we're rehashing over the same stuff over and over and over again. It just doesn't make any sense. And now we just postpone it, like with the off-street parking. Well, Jesus, we don't have any requirements on parking. Well, no, we're going to reduce it from 18 foot wide to a 10 foot. Now we'll reduce it back to 18 foot. But if you want to put some additional parking, oh, you can't do that. It's not allowed under the ordinance. So now we're in the same spot. We still have the problem. Now we're moving the cars out onto the street. I give up. I give up.
Okay. I do
Yeah,
share.
I think we should have a break for tonight and call it a night, just to take a breather. We've done a lot of work tonight, Will. We've done a lot of work tonight.
Well, I would share Commissioner Tolles' frustration that putting things off, and then we have to re-talk about them again and again. And if the commission seems to want to talk about this in 2 weeks, that's fine. But I don't see what the good is, but okay.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Vice Mayor Perschbacher.
I agree that we tend to rehash over things all the time, but there seems to be a pattern of why we rehash over things all the time. I would prefer that we finish this tonight rather than push it to the next meeting, which will push it to the next meeting, which will push it to the next meeting, because we have a pattern, a very obvious pattern going on here of why we can't get some things done.
What pattern is that, Amy?
That we just, instead of trying to come to a consensus on things, we just sit here and argue. Instead of saying, hey, this seems to be the problem, what can we do to solve it? We just have all of these little rants.
We just gave I do not agree with you that we just gave staff all sorts of direction on those items that we've discussed for the last hour. We're just starting another new agenda item or another new work session item. And it's going into 9:15. So last 2 weeks ago, we went for 3 hours because the LDFA representatives, Aaron Strang and Jim McBride, talks for 45 minutes. So, but I really think that we've done a lot of work to this evening and got some things cleared up. Decided we didn't want to use lots for low-income housing. Decided there was some people that were interested in off-street parking or, allowing off-street parking. So you saying that we're rehashing this stuff, that's already two directions we've given staff. So now we're discussing if we want to look at the square footage requirements, 15 units per acre, if for multifamily apartments, or if we want to do some evaluation that should be changed in the ordinance. So that's the question we're on right now. So we're getting things done. I don't understand why you're saying that, but we do hash out things for too long. So I'll be quiet now.
I think before we can we leave for the night, I just want direction on that last item that we were talking about. I was open to removing that requirement for the unit per acre. And I think that really applies. I think the CD4, I'd be open to opening that up to CD5 as well. And we can do that. I think that You can call it after that. So, Commissioner Tolis.
I'm in favor of doing that, but we keep piecemealing things. I've asked for the last 3 years to get this zoning ordinance figured out. Get the builders in, meet with them, get this done. It can be done. But no, it's not getting done, so we have problems, continuing problems with this. Well, if staff can't take the direction to do it, then get somebody else in there that can get it done. I'm sick and tired of this. This is just ridiculous.
Mayor, I would
Commissioner
say
Tolley.
that we have addressed the zoning issues that have come up. There is only one that is out there still that we have not addressed that has to do with the location of the garage. And we are waiting to hear back from the Home Builders Association about their recommendation for that. And as soon as we have that, we will have addressed every zoning issue item that has been referred to staff to deal with.
But it's still not done, correct?
That is the only one that is not done.
Well, it's been 3 years. And
And-
now we have this other item on the square footage.
Now, the square footage was not related to the zoning ordinance change. That's a new issue that has been in place for a long time that we're bringing forward as a way to solve issues.
Correct.
The issues with the zoning changes that have been referred to staff have been dealt with other than the garage location. These are new issues that will move us forward in other areas
That are being brought up by the builders, correct?
and or staff based on what they've heard over the years.
Commissioner Alsager.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with your assessment of it, that this is something that should be changed.
Thank you, Commissioner Alsager. Commissioner Malone.
Change it.
All right. And Commissioner Ronan.
Change it.
All right. It feels like we have a clear consensus on that item.
I don't know if I'm on board with that, but it doesn't matter because I'm in the minority. I value green space. Dealing with a builder that built next to the Chippewa River and how many units they got to put down there under the 2,900 square foot per unit, and how much was taken up by the parking lots, which is no longer now an issue. But I value green space. And I also value green space for stormwater runoff. So the bigger the building, the less green grass on a lot, the more stormwater runoff. So, but that's my comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Gillis, I would argue that this change would actually allow for potentially more green space because you wouldn't have to put cement down or pavement for parking. So.
Yeah, that's already happening. No, we're talking on-street parking. That would eliminate maybe some parking lots, but yeah. No, the 2,900 square feet, they would still build the same size building. They just push more people in it. They make this unit smaller so they can increase their profit line. That's how that works.
All right, I see a couple of hands up by Pete and George, but I'm assuming you guys are good to go.
We're good to go. I'm sorry. I didn't click that
All
on.
right. All right, well, it's 9:18. I want to thank staff for their time and their direction in these issues. I think that we've made some progress, and I look forward to more progress later.
And thank you, fellow commissioners. I'm heading out to a campground. My husband is waiting, so I appreciate you getting me out of here, at least maybe before dark. Thank you so much.
Great.
We need to do anything? Okay, great.
So we're done.
We good? Okay. Thank you.